It's the early morning hours of June 18th, 1982. An office worker in London is on his way to work when he passes under Blackfriars Bridge, and something catches his eye. A man is hanging from the bridge's iron scaffolding, his feet dangling just above the water. His pockets are stuffed with bricks, and on him, exactly $11,000 in cash. This man is no ordinary person. His name is Roberto Calvi. And in Italy, they gave him a nickname, God's Banker. The story I'm about to tell you today isn't just about how this man died under a bridge. It's about how the Vatican, the Mafia, secret lodges, and trillions in dirty money all became tangled together. So if you're ready, let's begin. First, you need to know this. The Vatican has its own bank. It's called IOR, short in Italian for Istituto per le Opere di Religione, meaning the Institute for Religious Works. Sounds innocent enough, right? You'd imagine it collecting money for the church, funneling it into charity work. But this bank actually operated like a black box sitting in the middle of its own country, subject to no outside oversight, making up its own rules as it went. Think about it. One of the richest institutions in the world, and at the same time, one of the least regulated banks in the world. That combination alone is a recipe for disaster. At the end of the 1970s, an American archbishop is running this bank, Paul Marcinkus. A big, broad-shouldered man who grew up on the streets of Chicago, looking more like a former American football player than a clergyman. His career started as the Pope's bodyguard, and from there, he rose to head the IOR. And this man behaves less like a priest in a collar and more like an investment banker working Wall Street. There's a famous line attributed to him: "You can't run the church on Hail Marys." In other words, prayer alone won't cut it. You need money. And he wasn't looking too closely at where that money came from. This is exactly where Roberto Calvi enters the picture. Calvi is the man at the head of Milan-based Banco Ambrosiano. This bank is one of Italy's largest private banks and is officially known as the Catholic Bank because it was founded to serve devout Italian businessmen. Calvi and Marcinkus's paths cross, and this is where a genuinely chilling partnership begins. The Vatican Bank comes to hold a significant portion of Ambrosiano's shares. Ambrosiano, in turn, sets up a web of shell companies abroad, especially in Panama and Luxembourg. On paper, the official owner of these companies appears to be the IOR, but who's actually managing that money, who's actually using it, nobody quite knows. Now I need to bring in a third character, because this story is incomplete without him. Michele Sindona, he's another banker, but with an even darker past than Calvi's. He's known to have direct ties to the Sicilian Mafia, and some researchers even describe him as the architect of the Mafia's money laundering operations. Sindona also served for a time as a financial advisor to the Vatican. So picture this. In the same circle at the same bank, you have a man deeply entangled with the Mafia, an archbishop managing the Vatican's money, and a banker serving as the bridge between the two. By the end of the 1970s, this trio forms the most dangerous triangle in Italian finance. So where was this money actually coming from? This is the crux of the whole story. Back then in Italy, especially around Sicily and Naples, enormous amounts of cash were circulating from drug trafficking and arms smuggling. You can't just walk that cash into an ordinary bank and deposit it because it leaves a trail. But if you first route that money through shell companies, then through Swiss accounts, and finally into accounts protected by the Vatican Bank, the money suddenly becomes clean. Because the Vatican is a sovereign state, and Italian courts or police have no jurisdiction within its borders. According to some prosecutors and researchers, the Vatican Bank functioned for the Mafia almost like the world's safest washing machine. On top of all this, there's also a secret Masonic lodge known as P2, short in Italian for Propaganda Do. This wasn't an ordinary Masonic gathering. It functioned like a shadow power network with generals, intelligence chiefs, journalists, politicians, and of course, Roberto Calvi among its members. The man at its head, Licio Gelli, was called the Grand Master, and the lodge is alleged to have aimed at controlling Italy's democratic institutions from within. In 1981, Italian police search Gelli's home and find the lodge's membership list. The list explodes into a scandal because it includes cabinet ministers, military commanders, and intelligence agency heads, and right in the middle of it all, Roberto Calvi. When this scandal breaks, Banco Ambrosiano starts to collapse. It turns out Calvi had created a shortfall of billions of dollars, evaporating the money through those shell companies. In today's value, we're talking about roughly $1.5 billion, and by some estimates, the figure is much higher. The Italian press pins the nickname God's banker on Calvi because he was so entangled with the Vatican and because his collapse was set to shake the entire country to its core. In the summer of 1982, Calvi flees Italy for London on a fake passport, trying to escape the investigations closing in on him. And a few days later, he's found dead under that bridge. British police initially rule it a suicide, but this explanation doesn't satisfy many people because why would a man planning to take his own life fill his pockets with bricks? Years later, in the 2000s, new forensic examinations revealed that Calvi's hands lacked the kind of rust marks you'd expect from someone climbing the scaffolding to hang himself, and that the marks on his neck don't match a typical suicide pattern. Italian courts reopened the case, and several Mafia-linked individuals are tried for murder, but in 2007, they're all acquitted for lack of evidence. So officially, to this day, nobody knows for certain who killed Calvi, or even whether he was actually murdered at all. And what about Marcinkus, God's banker's counterpart on the Vatican side? He never had to appear before an Italian court because the Vatican kept its shield of diplomatic immunity firmly around him. When Italian prosecutors wanted to arrest him, the Vatican's borders became a fortress protecting him. Years after the scandal, Marcinkus quietly settled in Arizona, and in 2006 he died there, having never been formally tried. Michele Sindona met his end a bit earlier. In 1986, poisoned by cyanide slipped into his prison coffee, a death that went down as a mystery of its own. In the end, the Vatican never formally admitted any wrongdoing in this scandal, but it did pay Ambrosiano's creditors around $224 million, framing it, of course, as a goodwill gesture rather than a legal admission of liability. In other words, they paid the money but said, "We're not guilty." And that might be the most ironic part of this whole story. The institution the world regards as its holiest became this entangled with the world's darkest money, and in the end, no one was ever formally held accountable. There's actually a reason I'm telling you this story today. Because this isn't just a scandal frozen in the past, it still forms the backdrop for ongoing debates about reforming the Vatican's financial system. Even under Pope Francis, steps were taken toward transparency at the IOR with outside auditors brought in, because the institution still hasn't managed to shake off its shadowy history. A man found hanging under a bridge with his pockets full of bricks ended up dragging the financial reputation of the world's most powerful religious institution behind him for 40 years. This is a story that shows real life can sometimes be more striking than the best fiction films. Religion, money, the Mafia, and secret lodges, all meeting under the same bridge. What did you think of this story? Do you believe Calvi really took his own life, or was he made a victim? Let's talk about it in the comments.